The sky was heavy with clouds as I made my way toward the 5051 protest site. A thin mist hung in the air as my nerves began to creep in. This was my first real field assignment, and I had no idea what I was heading into. Adrian isn't the kind of town you expect history to remember, but maybe that's exactly why I was going. The highway into Adrian was quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies your thoughts. Tree branches hung low in the damp, and a low mist clung to the fields like a warning. Michigan's sky had pressed itself flat against the earth, a steel gray ceiling over the road. My windshield wipers squeaked at a low, rhythmic pace. I'd thrown on my trench coat more for utility than fashion. It repelled the rain well enough, but no coat could block out the uncertainty curling in my gut. This was small-town Michigan. Not exactly the kind of place that makes headlines for protest movements. I didn't expect much. Maybe a handful of signs, a few passionate voices, and a scattering of honks in solidarity if I was lucky. Even as I passed a few other vehicles heading in the same direction, I caught myself wondering if they were protesters or just folks on their way to Meyer. The contradiction wasn't lost on me. Here I was driving into a town best known for its rural quiet to cover a protest tied to a national resistance effort. 50 events, 50 states, one day. A movement against oligarchy in a place that rarely sees more than high school football and county fairs. I couldn't tell if I was too early or just in the wrong place. I've reported on stories before, but always at a distance. Aggregating coverage, contextualizing the moment, riffing off headlines. This was different. I wasn't reading wire reports. I was the wire. There wouldn't be a safety net of polished press releases or national commentary to fall back on. Just me, a mic, a notebook, and whatever the hell Adrian decided to become that day. The nerves weren't screaming, they were humming, steady and low, like a power line overhead. I told myself I was fine. After all, I'd prepared. Cleared SD cards, charged batteries, rehearsed questions. Still, there's a difference between imagining a moment and driving straight into it. And I couldn't shake the pressure, this unspoken expectation that I had to make something of this. That the protest couldn't just be a protest. It had to be the moment I became a real reporter. It's strange to be uncertain about something that matters so much. Stranger still to realize that no matter how much you study journalism, nothing prepares you for the silence of a small town before it wakes up to fight a system bigger than itself. This wasn't DC or New York. This was Adrian. And whatever happened here, it was mine to capture. I pulled into town about 45 minutes before the protest was scheduled to begin. The streets were still. No crowds, no chants, no sea of signs. Just a quiet Saturday morning in a city that didn't look like it had a revolution on its calendar. I parked near the courthouse and scanned the area. A few cars sat idle, but nothing that screamed movement. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misread the energy. Maybe this was going to be little more than a ghost of a protest. Symbolic, sure, but small, contained. Still, I waited. The clouds above pressed lower. The mist turned to a cold whisper against my coat. The kind of weather that makes people stay home. But something in me kept watch. there was still time. And in that time, Adrian might just surprise me. I stayed by the courthouse steps, watching the minutes tick down. The protest wasn't supposed to start for another half hour, but I kept my eyes on every corner, every passing car, every movement in the periphery. The town still felt quiet, but tension hung in the air, not unlike the mist clinging to the pavement. Whatever was about to happen, it hadn't revealed itself yet, but it was close, and when it came, I'd be ready to capture it. By 11:15 a.m., the courthouse steps were already overflowing. The protest was scheduled for 11:30, but the crowd showed up early, undeterred by cold mist and overcast skies. What began as a quiet corner in a small Michigan city quickly transformed into a roaring front line against oligarchy. I didn't see them coming. One moment I was pacing near the courthouse steps, doubting whether anyone would show. The next, I turned a corner, and there they were. Signs raised, voices rising. A few hundred citizens of Adrian had poured onto the streets, some with pickets in hands, others wrapped in coats and ponchos, pushing through the cold like it owed them nothing. It was 11:15 a.m., 15 minutes before the protest was scheduled to start, and the event had already taken a life of its own. Car horns echoed like war drums, honking in rhythm as they passed the crowd. Protesters roared in response. The air buzzed, not just with sound, but with energy. Kids stood beside grandparents. First-time demonstrators stood shoulder to shoulder with lifelong activists. A chant broke out. The voice of the people will never be broken. They weren't just holding signs. They were holding the line. There was no mic check, no central announcement. The protest didn't start, it ignited. The weather hadn't improved, but nobody cared. The courthouse lawn, which had been silent just an hour earlier, was now filled with bodies booming with unity. The momentum pushed the timeline forward, and the resistance began not on schedule, but on instinct. One of the first voices I heard belonged to a woman who came out despite battling multiple sclerosis. She stood beside her young daughter, who suffers from rheumatoid arthritis.
I have MS, and I have a daughter who's 10 years old, and she has rheumatoid arthritis. So we are on the Medicaid system, and we're dealing with that all the time. And the thought of, like, how do I take care of my daughter? You know, how do I get her medicine? And the fact that Trump, he doesn't care about any of us. He doesn't care what happened. He doesn't even care about his own children, let alone my children. And I killed out everybody's children. So we should all, and obviously a lot of people feel the same way.
When I asked what summed up her reasons for being there, she said,
just the revolution. We need to make a giant change. The fact that they've taken rights away from everybody that isn't a cis white male. The fact that they're illegally detaining American citizens, let alone immigrants, and doing horrible things to them. And we have to do something as people, and this is the best thing we can do right now, is show them that there's power in numbers.
When I asked what the 50-51 movement meant to her, she didn't miss a beat.
I think it's a sign of hope. I think it's a sign that people are going to force change, and it's no longer we're going to sit back and let anybody in politics tell us how we're going to live our lives. We're not going to let billionaires dictate how we live. Elon Musk is making $686 million a minute, or $600 a minute, I'm sorry. A minute, though. And we make $7 an hour, you know?
Yeah.
Like, how is that not, like, how does that not make everybody upset? So,
Exactly.
it's equality. It's us all deserve the right to live and be happy. So happy. I thought, you know, it's like, if we got 10 people, it'd be great.
A couple nearby told me it was their first protest. When I asked what drove them to come out to the protest, one woman looked me dead in the eye and said, "Trump. I'm just sick." Her friend added, "He's hurting our friends, our family, our neighbors. If we don't speak now, I don't know what's going to happen." Among the crowd, I found one of the people responsible for making the Adrian protest happen. Denise Benjamin, a local organizer who stepped up when it became clear that not everyone could make it to the larger Lansing event.
Yeah, we put it out. We, Indivisible National out of D.C. put out a call to action nationally to do this. It's nationwide. It's everywhere today. So they were having one in Lansing, and we started getting a lot of feedback about how, well, they couldn't get to Lansing for one reason or another, you know, the age or taking care of somebody. They couldn't be that far away and stuff. Yeah. And so Sarah and I said, well, why don't we just do one in Adrian?
Denise, who began organizing during Trump's first term, hadn't expected such a turnout. "We weren't officially supposed to start until 11:30, she said, gesturing to the overflowing corners of the courthouse lawn. But people just kept coming. I can't even count how many are here. This is more than I imagined. And they're still showing up." She paused, her voice cracking just slightly. This is what democracy looks like.
I mean, I live on my Social Security. I worked my whole life and I paid into that. That's my retirement. And they're cutting it, and now I have to worry if I'm going to get a check next month. You know? I never worried about getting my Social Security check. It was never a question.
She wasn't just talking about personal fear. She was talking about betrayal. Protesters spoke of elected officials too afraid or too indifferent to stand up to Trump's agenda. Our legislators need to stop being spineless, she said. They need to actually do their jobs. That's what this is about. And there was something else, too. A shift. A subtle but important change in the conversation. I have noticed some people that are saying, "I didn't vote for this," Denise told me. I voted for them, but I didn't vote for this. It's coming in because it's starting to affect them personally. And unfortunately, it has to come to that sometimes for some people. By the time I left Adrian, chants still echoed down the block. The voice of the people will never be broken. What started as a quiet courthouse lawn had become a living symbol of resistance. It wasn't just the size of the crowd that struck me. It was the unity. Generations, backgrounds, and political histories converging on a shared truth. Enough is enough. As I turned the key and headed towards Saline, I realized I'd just witnessed something rare in America today. Solidarity. By the time I pulled into Saline, I figured I'd already seen the best turnout the day had to offer. But this quiet little crossroads town wasn't planning on staying quiet. The first signs went up before the hour struck, and soon the corners of Michigan Avenue and Ann Arbor Street were buzzing with chants, signs, and solidarity. At first glance, it looked like any sleepy Saturday in Saline. A handful of people stood on the corner with signs bundled against the wind, waving to passing cars. But then came the horns, and then came more people, climbing out of pickups and sedans, crossing streets, waving flags. Before long, both sides of Michigan Avenue were lined with protesters stretching down the block. Just like in Adrian, the protest started ahead of schedule. People didn't wait for permission. They saw each other and activated like a chemical reaction. A rhythm started to build, voices calling, horns responding, and more feet filling the pavement. I walked to the edge of the intersection, trying to take it all in. There were older folks in parkas, young couples, a woman with a toddler holding a handmade sign. Another protester banged on a drum as people marched in loops across all four corners. Saline may not be big, but that day, it didn't feel small. One of the first people I spoke with introduced himself as Carl, with a K. He smiled, but he wasn't joking around.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well, sir.
My name's Carl.
Carl, I'm Brian.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It's a Swedish Carl with a K.
What was that?
Swedish Carl.
With a K?
With a K.
With a K. All right, Carl with a K.
We thought it would be very big in Ann Arbor, and that we thought we might be the only two here
Oh.
at this
Saline
one.
is changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're part
But
of
we're
it.
not the only ones.
No.
There's a lot of people. I don't know how to count.
Carl wasn't there to make noise for the sake of it. He was there because he no longer trusted the system he had spent his life paying into.
I agreed to put my money in Social Security in 1958.
Yeah.
That money is important. I've been saving it all this time.
Absolutely.
And trusting.
Yeah.
The trust is maybe in this place. Donald Trump and Elon Musk are not trustworthy.
No, they're not. Absolutely not.
They're takers.
Absolutely. Around us, sidewalks were full, faces from every direction. Protesters of all ages passed by, waving signs that read, "Save our future," "No to oligarchy," and "You're fired, Don." Across the intersection, a woman marched with a bright yellow sign that read simply, "Protect my granddaughter." No one was quiet anymore. Of course, not everyone passing by was supportive. At one point, a man driving a garbage truck slowed down, rolled down his window, and hurled insults at the crowd. Some kind of half-hearted attempt to provoke or mock. He didn't get far. A protester fired back without hesitation. "Are you fucking kidding me? You drive a garbage truck. That's what Trump got you. A garbage truck." It wasn't just a clapback. It was a pressure valve releasing. Years of political gaslighting, stagnant wages, and institutional rot exploded in that single moment. The crowd cheered, not out of malice, but because someone finally said what they were all feeling. By the time I left, the people of Saline had claimed every corner of the intersection. Protesters weren't just holding signs, they were holding space. From the youngest kids to veterans of decades-old fights. The crowd kept growing, kept moving, kept making noise. What began as a quiet Midwestern gathering had turned into something undeniable. If this is what Saline could do, I thought, then Ann Arbor, just 20 minutes down the road, was about to erupt.
Drive on government, Trump. Are you fucking kidding me? That's the word, bud. That's what he does. That's what
I saw the flashing squad lights before I even found a place to park. From blocks away, chants echoed down Washtenaw Avenue. The march had already started. Protesters weren't waiting for speeches, they were claiming the streets. I couldn't even get close to the center of it at first. Parking was a battlefield, and the streets were already swelling with foot traffic. Protesters spilled across both sidewalks, stretching down Washtenaw Avenue as far as the eye could see. The energy was electric, humming beneath the cold April wind. Ann Arbor wasn't just participating in the national 50-51 action, it was leading it. There were signs. End the greed. Protect the future. No to billionaire tyranny. Flags waved in the breeze, drums pounded in the distance, and then she appeared. One woman painted like Braveheart, blue from cheek to jaw, standing at the curb and screaming, "They'll never take our freedom." It wasn't cosplay, it was conviction. In Ann Arbor, the crowd was in motion, marching in organized bursts across intersections, occupying corners, obeying lights, but never standing still. A squad car idled at a distance, lights flashing but sirens silent, while protest leaders with megaphones directed traffic. Not cars, but people. And they were everywhere. The march pressed forward with a strange kind of grace, fluid, determined, and remarkably organized. Protesters crossed when the walk sign blinked on, then surged forward like a tide. As one wave reached the corner, another rose behind it. They moved together, not in chaos, but in rhythm, a collective pulse. I fell in with a group heading east toward Ypsilanti. They chanted between breaths, held signs over heads, and laughed between honks of support. Some marched in hiking boots, others in worn sneakers. One in dress shoes like he'd come straight from a shift. I saw strollers, service dogs, rainbow flags, and a man with a Free Palestine sign folded under his arm, shouting about Musk as he walked. Every few blocks, someone picked up a drumbeat. Someone else started a new chant. This is what democracy looks like, rolled down Washtenaw like thunder. In front of me, a young woman with a scarf pulled tight against the wind waved to every passing car. Most respond with blaring approval. On the edges, locals stood on their porches. Some watched quietly. Others raised fists. Nobody shouted them down. The protesters weren't just marching against something, they were marching for something. And Ann Arbor was giving them the space to do it. Near the intersection of Glencoe and Washtenaw, I caught up with one of the organizers, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the flow of bodies. "How far are they going?" I asked, half joking, half wondering if the crowd was about to march straight to Ypsilanti. She laughed. "Just to Glencoe Crossing. That's where most folks parked. People aren't that ambitious." She glanced back at the wave of protesters still pouring in and added, "Actually, I don't know anymore." Further up, I spoke with a man bundled in flannel and denim. "What brought you out today?" I asked. He looked at me like I asked why the sun rises. "Everything," he said. "Trump, Musk, the gutting of the country. My kid's 12 and already asking why we can't afford to go to the doctor. What else do you need?" One sign summed up the march's soul better than any speech. "Protect my rights," scribbled in marker on neon board, held by a teenager who looked like she hadn't stopped smiling in hours. I didn't ask what it meant. I didn't need to. By this point in the day, my legs were sore, my throat was hoarse, and my trench coat still smelled like the rain from Adrian. But none of that mattered, because everywhere I looked, people were wide awake, angry, joyful, exhausted, and unified. This wasn't just another protest. This was something bigger, a heartbeat that stretched across county lines. It reminded me of what Bernie Sanders said the night before. There are two Americas. And here, in the cold spring streets of Ann Arbor, the other America had come to life. Not the billionaire class, not the boardroom cowards, the people. They were marching, singing, laughing, yelling. They were showing up. There was no podium, no cameras, no national networks, just drums, chants, and handmade signs. And yet, it felt like the most American thing I'd seen in years. This wasn't political theater. It was democracy with scuffed boots and sore feet. It was resistance that didn't need a spotlight. As I stood at the edge of the march, watching them spill down Washtenaw toward Ypsi, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belief. Ann Arbor didn't just show up. They lit a fire, and I got to walk right through it. It was the horns. That was the sound that echoed across 3 cities, across 100 signs, across generations. It didn't matter if you were in Adrian, Saline, or Ann Arbor. Every car that passed and blared in support wasn't just making noise. It was answering a call. It began in Adrian, where I stood alone near a courthouse under gray skies, wondering if anyone else would show. Then they did. Early, loud and determined. Mothers, veterans, first-timers, and the chronically ill. By 11:15, the protest had already kicked off, and by noon, Adrian, yes, Adrian, had filled its streets with chants and homemade signs. From there, it was a half-hour drive to Saline, where the corners of Michigan Avenue and Ann Arbor Street were already alive with energy. A man named Carl, with a K, thought he and his wife would be the only ones. Instead, the town rose up in full force, claiming every corner and marching to the rhythm of drums and honking horns. Even a heckling garbage truck driver couldn't shake the moment. He only strengthened it. And then came Ann Arbor. The city wasn't just participating, it was on fire. The crowd poured down Washtenaw like a flood, stretching down Carpenter to Glencoe, maybe farther. Braveheart face paint, rainbow flags, megaphones, strollers, retirees, service animals, and signs that screamed in permanent marker, "You're fired, Don." If Adrian was a spark and Saline the steady burn, Ann Arbor was the explosion. The message was the same everywhere I went, even if the words were different. And Adrian, a mother with MS, held her daughter's hand and told me she was frightened for Medicaid, for medicine, for a future. In Saline, Carl said he'd been paying into Social Security since 1958, and now, under Trump and Musk, he didn't trust he'd see it. In Ann Arbor, a father marched so his kid wouldn't have to ask why going to the doctor cost more than groceries. They were tired of being ignored, tired of scraping by while billionaires shape policy. "We're not going to sit back and let them dictate how we live," one woman told me. Another said it plainly, "Trump, I'm just sick." An elderly woman's sign said, "Protect my granddaughter," and somehow that said it all. These weren't just protests, they were public declarations of exhaustion, fear, and defiance. The unifying thread wasn't partisanship, it was betrayal. These people had worked, paid in, raised kids, and followed rules, and now the systems they had held up for decades were crumbling beneath their feet. So they stood up, together, and made damn sure they were heard. This was my first major field assignment. The first time I wasn't watching a protest through someone else's lens, but standing in the middle of it, soaking wet and throat raw, chasing quotes, moments, and meaning. The nerves I'd felt that morning in Adrian had long since melted into adrenaline. By the time I reached Ann Arbor, I wasn't documenting the story anymore. I was inside it. I'd expected a trickle. I got a flood. I thought I'd have to work to find voices. Instead, they surrounded me. They shouted over traffic. They waved signs with trembling hands. They marched with babies and back pain and unshakable purpose. And I realized something. I hadn't come here just to report on the protests. I'd come to see if the country was still awake. And it is. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in Adrian, Saline, and Ann Arbor, the American people showed they still have lungs, legs, and fire. Not for performative patriotism, but for something real. The fight to live without begging billionaires for scraps. The 50-51 protests didn't dethrone oligarchs or rewrite legislation, but they did something just as important. They shattered the illusion that people in so-called nowhere towns don't care, don't fight, or don't show up. They did show up. In the cold, in the rain, in their hometowns. They didn't just resist Trump, they resisted the whole machine. These protests weren't about winning the day, but about refusing to surrender it. Protesters came not because they thought they could fix everything in one afternoon, but because staying home felt like surrender. They didn't come with solutions in hand. They came with open hands, raised fists, and the refusal to be invisible. What happened in Michigan on April 5th wasn't isolated. It wasn't aesthetic. It was a rupture. A noise from the edges of the country loud enough to rattle the center. And maybe, just maybe, that's where change always starts. With the people no one thought were listening anymore. By the time I drove home, windshield streaked, shoes soaked, memory cards full, I realized something had changed. Not just in the towns I visited, but in me. This wasn't just coverage. It was a reminder that democracy doesn't die in silence. It gets buried in nihilism. And then, one Saturday in April, it stands up, honks back, and screams until the silence breaks. The people of Adrian, Saline, and Ann Arbor weren't just voices from nowhere. They were voices from the edge. And now the edge is moving inward. Eyes open, voices loud.